Hi everyone, this is Elena of The Witch's Box, and I'm here today with another episode of Witch Booktube, and today we're going to be talking about Existential Kink by Carolyn Elliot, PhD. So this book has been on my radar for a while. I actually don't know exactly when. I think it was published in early 2020. And it's also come up because some of the readers and watchers out there who are part of our free Witches Gathering forum has brought it up. Have you read the book? And at the time I had said, no, I haven't, but it's on my radar. It's on my to-be read list. So I finally got around to reading it. I'm going to read you the bio and then we're going to get into this book. Carolyn Elliot, PhD, is an author and teacher who specializes in helping people achieve dramatic positive change in their lives through shadow integration practices and applied occult philosophy. She is the creator of several popular online courses and founder of the online magazine Witch. She earned her PhD in critical and cultural studies at the University of Pittsburgh and now resides in Pennsylvania with her family. You can visit her at www.carolyngraceelliot.com. So basically this book is about working with and through your shadow through the metaphor and lens of kink, and specifically about finding the pleasure in the uncomfortable, finding the pleasure in those dark parts of ourselves that we're afraid or anxious about and unhappy about. Since this book has been on my radar for a while, I have had the opportunity to watch the conversation play out. There's a lot of criticism about this book. People really have a hard time, some, not all, with the languaging, with the lens from which she approaches the shadow, from the idea that when we have self-destructive patterns or patterns that are obstructive to us, addictions, an addiction to, abusive relationship patterns, or self-destructive behaviors like procrastination and, those things that we do to basically slow down and stop our progress in our lives, there is a payout. This is a common thing. This isn't new to the book, but the way she words it has been a big trigger for people, which I find interesting, because the reality is that when we are engaging in something that may be unhealthful for us, like being in a relationship that isn't the best dynamic, like procrastinating and not meeting deadlines and really failing at the goals that we keep setting for ourselves, like engaging in that passive aggressive behavior that ends up screwing up your relationship, there is a payoff that you get from that. There is always a payoff that you get from that. And until you admit that payoff to yourself, which is part of our shadow, until you're able to admit, yes, every time I create a really horrible fight, every time I push so-and-so to call me horrible names, every time I do that, I'm getting a payoff. There's something that it's feeding in me. And until you address what it's feeding in you, what the payoff is, you're not going to work through the shadow parts of yourself that continue to perpetuate that behavior and that dynamic in your life. This is super basic psychology. It's not new. It's not out of this world. It's not fringy. This is a fact. Now, what triggers people in reading this book is that her languaging is very different. It's not necessarily about a payout, although that's exactly what she's talking about. She talks about you get a sexual rush. You get a turn on out of it. You get excited from it. And a lot of people are like, fuck that. I don't get excited when someone treats me terrible. That's not true. I don't get pleasure. I don't get aroused. It's the language and the lens from which she's speaking to this. So it was interesting because before I read the book, I kept watching the back and forth. The people who were like, no, this has been revolutionary for me. And the people who are like, fuck this book. This is bullshit. This isn't true. She's crazy, blah, 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 and all the horrible things. It's always amazing to me to watch books like this that can create such dialogue and disagreement and charge, and then read it and then make decisions for myself, right? Because this is what I encourage all of us to do. What I'm going to say about this is that yes, there are others who are doing this method, who are part of her classes and her community, and who have and continue to practice this work and are finding incredible results. I really love this book. And this is something just on a personal level, because of the fact that I do these booktube reviews, the fact that I have a book subscription. And so there's a lot of dialogue about books and people are writing and what's popular and what's not. And I'm here to talk to you about these books that I read. While I'm reading books, there is now a second voice in my head or a second portion of my head or my mind that is constantly analyzing, how's the audience going to interpret this? How am I going to explain this to people? Like, what are the people who don't like this going to say? What are the people who do like this are going to say, right? So it's sometimes hard for me because I really just want to get lost in a book and turn off that part of my brain that is reading for the review and reading for the masses. I struggled with that with this book. This is just my own personal stuff. It has nothing to even do with the book as much as it is with multi-tracking. The fact that when I read, it's not just for me, it's not just for the pleasure, I'm also always thinking of all of you. And what I'm also realizing is that if I spend a whole lot of time online, which I'm spending less and less time on, and I catch these commentaries, because more often than not, the two social media platforms that I probably spend my most time on are Instagram and Goodreads. Like I do Facebook for maybe 10 minutes in the morning, and I'm done. But because I'm on Goodreads as well, I see book discussions all the time. So I get the benefit and the curse, right, of all the different things that are said about the book, good, bad, and ugly, and objective. This is what I'm going to say. I'm going to try to divide my review. I've already talked a little bit about what the triggers are around this book. For me, I really resonated with this book. I love this book. I didn't quite relate to her BDSM-y, kink metaphor and lens to looking through and looking at the shadow, but it was a neutral non-relating. Do you know what I mean? It wasn't something that blocked me from it because I got it. And I'm like, this is really a unique and amazing way of looking at it. I feel like it's totally spot on. One of the ways that for me, I work with my shadow is to fully dive in and embrace what is going on, what I'm creating in my life in order to transmute it. And that's basically at the heart of what this is. However, she talks about in terms of who this book is not for at this time. And I remember, this might not be true, but this was my recollection of my experience of reading the book. I remember that when she brought it up, it was long after I thought she needed to have said it in the book. That might not be true. So take that all with a grain of salt. This book and this method doesn't quite work for people who are in the depths of depression or in the depths of anxiety or in some sort of acute mental health episode, because to go down the rabbit hole of fully embracing your shadow can trigger a spiraling that is actually very counterproductive. That warning is here. If you don't have the fortitude to really dive into those darker parts of yourself because it's going to trigger you into an acute episode that you're not going to be able to get out of, then this is not the book for you at this time. And when I heard it, I'm like, yeah, absolutely. I was thinking that from the beginning. So I'm going to give you a quickie gist. We've talked about the fact that she talks about working with the shadow and working through the shadow in a really quick and transformative way by embracing it. And really, because of the languaging is very kinky, very BDSM-y, sort of. It's not. It's like BDSM-y light, but it is, right? Some people who are not even part of that world can be like, oh, this is a... So I just put that out there. Because it comes through that lens, there's very much this emphasis on if you are someone who has to create constant drama for yourself in order to stunt your path, you need to acknowledge and embrace the fact that you really get turned on by this. There's something about this dynamic that really turns you on. And there are exercises here about really diving into that, really just embracing that full force and owning it, which can be incredibly threatening because there's also the initial like, what if this is where I get stuck? Or what does this even say about me? What is that about? So that's really the gist of the book. And she talks through what the shadow is. She talks through what the transformational process is. I really enjoyed this book. Again, it is not for everyone. I know that there is a lot of questions and a lot of emphasis right now on, I want to work with my shadow. I want to do shadow work. What does that look like? This is psychological union shadow work. This is not necessarily, because we keep conflating these two things, this is not necessarily working with the dark goddess or working in the underground and all of those other things that we do. This is specifically about working through our shadow, because our shadow selves, if not addressed, if not embraced, if not fully integrated, will not transmute and not allow us deeper integration and deeper freedom. So because that comes up a lot, this book addresses that. This book has a system for dealing with that. It is not for everyone. Understand that what I said in the beginning, and you will find in other books, the terminology is usually there's a payoff for you in a codependent relationship, even though you feel like you're drowning, even though you feel like this isn't where you belong, even though you feel like you're oppressed and suffocating. There's a payoff. You have to acknowledge and identify what that payoff is, because underneath that payoff is a whole world of why this is part of you and where the transmutation lies. So that's the usual way of addressing that. She doesn't address it that way. She addresses it and identifies it as you get off on that. You sexually, physically get off, you get a rush, you get an exciting thrill when you engage in these behaviors, when you engage in addictive relationships that are abusive, which can be really off-putting, right? When you call it that way, there's definitely a like, fuck that, that's not true. So understand that that's part of this book. I think that working through that initial gut reaction has its own merit. So it's part of the reason why I recommend the book if you feel called to this kind of challenge. But again, if you are harboring deep and acute shame over who you are and what you're doing and what the patterns of your life is, if you're in deep acute depression or anxiety or other issues that are really destabilizing, I don't recommend this book for you, because the exercises are really about, you need to go down and you got to embrace it. Whether it's, even if it's like the thing that you think is the ugliest, most shameful, horrific part of you, you need to go into it. You need to not avoid it. You need to fully embrace it, claim it, and be it fully with all of that comes with it, whatever emotional upheaval might come with it, in order to transmute it. And that can be incredibly destabilizing for some people, depending on where they are in their mental health stages, okay? She also talks about that people have asked her that question, and she's like, it's not that this book is never for you ever, but when you're out of that stage, when you're feeling more stability, then yes, these exercises work really well for you. So that's the caveat that's in the book. That's a caveat that I give to you. If you're interested in working with the shadow in a way that's a little bit different, in a way that has different terminology that might, for some people, the terminology totally makes sense. I got it. I totally got it. But I've been doing this work for a very, very long time. I have been in therapy since I was 19 at various stages of my life. I am not in an acute place with my issues of shadow that are that destabilizing. They're frustrating, but they're not destabilizing, right? It's okay to not be there. So there's that. Existential Kink, and the subtitle is Unmask Your Shadow and Embrace Your Power by Carolyn Elliot. She also has other programs and other courses, I believe, on her website, so you can go ahead and check that out. Again, if it's something that interests you, there it is, Existential Kink. If you've read this book, and I know some of you have, I would love to hear about your experiences down below. Please share them. And those of you who are in the free forum, let's talk about it there, because I have a couple of other thoughts to share with the group. In any case, I hope that you're all well, and I will see you next week.